A próxima atividade do 29º Fórum da Liberdade é a palestra do Keynote Quirk. Compõe o palco Quirk e Fernando Ulrich. Essa atividade tem a previsão de 30 minutos de duração. O Keynote falará por 20 minutos e abriremos 10 minutos para perguntas. Fernando Ulrich, ex-vice-presidente do Instituto de Estudos Empresariais, boa tarde.
Boa tarde, senhoras e senhores. Autor e diretor de comunicação do Seasteading Institute, é escritor e novelista best-seller nas duas categorias. Coescreveu Seasteading, How Floating Cities Will Free the World, com Patrick Friedman. Como contador de histórias, gosta de mostrar aos leitores por que soluções para problemas globais estão vindo não apenas de argumentos, mas também de experiências. Com a palavra, Joe Quirk.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to this fabulous event and organizing it. I'm Joe Quirk. I'm an author, and I'm a full-time sea-evangelist. And I apologize to the translator because I'm going to be making up a lot of words. I'd like to introduce you to my community of ocean folk. Seasteaders are a diverse global community of nautical engineers, aquaculture farmers, maritime attorneys, medical researchers, security personnel, and investors, and we plan to build cities that float on the ocean. And why do we care about this so much? Everybody came to this conference because we want the same thing. We want voluntary societies based on choice, not force. My life changed when I discovered that the technology for voluntary civil society is here. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to reveal to you that thousands of prosperous, stateless societies already thrive. Free market regulatory bodies already provide rules for these societies. Voluntary private policing already protects people in this stateless world. Voluntary courts, which permit no lawyers, already administer justice in this world. Nation states may seem powerful, but those primitive institutions have barely conquered half the planet. How could this be? Start from the insight that we don't live on planet Earth. We live on planet Ocean. 45% of the Earth's surface is unclaimed by any state. The fact that we always look at our home from the angle that best shows the continents is part of our land-based myopia. A lot of people look at this satellite view of our planet and find it disorienting. What am I even looking at? That little green spot up top is Hawaii. For perspective, this is a view of our planet after it's turned for a couple of hours. This is the blue frontier, and I hope to show you that nation states emerge on land, while voluntary societies emerge on water. This is why Seasteaders plan to provide you with the technology to found your own floating nation on the ocean. And convincing people this is possible involves showing them technologies that already exist. Japan inaugurated the aquatic age in the year 2000 when the first large aircraft landed on a 1,000-meter floating airport in Tokyo Bay. Shell's Prelude is larger than the Empire State Building, and it will be floating in international waters for up to 25 years. Cruise ships are the size of skyscrapers, and people attend rock concerts in them. Cruise ships just keep getting bigger and bigger. The global cruise ship industry is caught in a virtuous spiral of ascending profits. The enormous size of the ships reduces the price each passenger pays, which compels more people to board them, which drives more revenue, which incentivizes the construction of ever bigger ships. The allure of the seas is about the same size as the Empire State Building minus the tower. These are libertarian skyscrapers. They flourish where there is no state. Cruise ships are semi-independent pioneers of the blue frontier. They dock in one nation, fly the flag of another nation, incorporate in another nation, and hire from anywhere. They pick and choose the laws best suited to their industry, and they make billions while maintaining friendly alliances with all nations. Passengers sign a contract for onboard security and health care with these floating skyscrapers that bring their own private hospitals along with them. They hire from the developing world, and poor people volunteer to take the jobs, which are seasonal. What if such jobs were permanent? What if cruise ships never docked? If the cruise ship industry was a country, it would be ranked as one of the fastest in economic growth. The gross domestic product of the USA has grown a lot since 1980, but the gross oceanic product of the cruise ship industry has grown at more than twice the average annual rate of the USA for the last 35 years. Those little ants in the upper left-hand corner are people. Their day is not unlike your day, except safer and more convenient. This is their neighborhood, with apartments and cafes down below. Everything I have to drive to in my city, they have within walking distance. And what's up on the roof to the left and the right there? Well, it's a basketball court on one side, a tennis ball court on the other side, ice rink theater down below. When I was on a large cruise ship in Alaska, I couldn't tell that I wasn't in a mall. I had no sense that we were moving. All the water I used was desalinated seawater. These people are watching a Broadway show that, as part of their tour, came to visit them on their free-floating town. I attended a theater where I watched French ballet, no charge. Then I went to the gym with a beautiful view that would be worth many millions in my hometown of San Francisco. I went bowling. People do a little gambling in a mini Las Vegas. Then they go to the beach, sunbathe, swim. Then they watch a high dive performance. Libertopia already exists. It's called Bluetopia. These people don't vote or argue about politics in their society. We demonstrate that voluntary societies work not by winning arguments, but by providing better options. These people don't need to change their ideologies. They just need to be offered better choices. When they're done watching this performance, they can stroll a few hundred feet and go surfing. On this ship, there are not one, but 2 surf machines on board. You can do everything I just showed you in one day without getting in your car, unless you want to play bumper cars. Look, it's complete anarchy. When you show people that there are more things in the oceans and earth than are dreamt of in their philosophies, to paraphrase Shakespeare, they often switch to the moral argument that you'll exploit the poor with your floating cities. To offer somebody a job is to exploit them. Well, last summer, I was on a National Geographic tour of the Galapagos Islands, and here are some of the crew. All the employees, including the biologist tour guides, grew up in the Galapagos. Just like cruise ships, they have no access to fresh water. None. Their wealth comes from specialization and trade. They protect their environment, train to be biologists, and sell their talents to me, the privileged American who can't otherwise afford ballet. As you can see, they're forced to work in a hierarchical structure for my amusement. And I mean, this is just for rich people, right? Budget cruises can cost as little as $31 a night. If you get off this floating city and get on that land city, your cost of living may go up. Your chances of being mugged, panhandled, ticketed, and taxed all go up by orders of magnitude, and nothing is in walking distance. On the cruise ship, there are no earthquakes. Cruise ships integrate seamlessly into nations all over the world, and yet that floating city has different labor laws, different business laws, different costs, and a much lower tax burden. That cruise ship is a separate jurisdiction, and nobody is threatened by it. You can count here 5 floating skyscrapers integrating into this city in Brazil. I think it's Rio de Janeiro. They can stay, they can leave, it depends on what the residents want. And people say, I wish my cruise would never end. Well, a seastead is just a cruise ship that doesn't dock. It's not the largest engineering jump to go from this to this. And this artist's rendition of a floating city is based on a flower. Is this just a futuristic fantasy? South Korea inaugurated 3 floating islands designed as flowers, which they call a seed, a bud, and a full bloom. It has a convention hall, restaurants, and arcades, all powered by solar energy. It's not the biggest engineering jump to go from this to this, so we decided to make it happen. The first floating city with significant political autonomy could be established by 2020. The Dutch are already working on it. Our friend Rutger de Graaf, an engineer who calls himself a water pioneer, is co-author of the Seasteading implementation plan. To quote Rutger, any coastal city can environmentally and economically pay for itself with an offshore floating city. His company, DeltaSync, ultimately plans to use algae to transform coastal runoff into food and fuel. Rutger claims no money would need to change hands. He calls it a non-monetary symbiotic model. Agriculture can pollute the environment, aquaculture can restore the environment. The medium-term plan is that this floating village, as it profits and grows, will leave territorial waters and go out into international waters. This is Artisanopolis, based on the foundational vision of our Dutch engineers. It's designed by an architectural group that calls itself Fort Galt and RoArch 3D. To quote the designer Gabriel Scheer, a large modular wave breaker surrounds the city to shelter it from rough waves. The first permanent businesses on the high seas could be sovereign floating hospitals that provide cutting-edge care to patients who choose it. Eduardo McIntosh, an architect from Ecuador, designed a whole variety of sea crafts based on the seastead vision, including affordable small craft for travel between seasteads when waters are calm. But waters on the high seas are seldom calm. The deeper and heavier the hull, the more stable it is in waves. Water Scraper, designed by the Malaysian architect Sarli Andre bin Sarkum, incorporates many blue-green technologies, including solar, wave, wind power, and it is designed to produce its own energy through farming, aquaculture, and hydroponics. A beach is the most effective wave break. A buoyant tube upholds a flexible hammock that can support sand, and vertical farm skyscrapers require deep ballast under the water, which could accommodate an underground stadium and a transit system designed by the American architect Tyler Kreshover. Modular neighborhoods can detach and move to another seastead or form a new seastead, and the larger the city, the more stable it is in waves, incentivizing improved governance to attract more modules. The French architect Jacques Rougerie designed this floating sustainable city following the form and function of a manta ray. Mobile cities 3D printed on the ocean will not resemble static cities built on bedrock. The aquatic paradigm will liberate humanity to reconceive construction, food, energy, governance, even the textures and shapes of daily life. But isn't the blue frontier an even wilder west? What about all the lawlessness? Fortunately, a free-flowing market of regulatory bodies has been operating on the sea since before many nation-states were founded. More than 50 marine classification societies operate worldwide, none with a state-enforced monopoly, and their governance rules advance with the technologies they govern because they must compete fluidly with each other. We feel safe on ships in large part because of these venerable institutions. The reason most people have never heard of these free market regulatory bodies is because they work so well they don't call attention to themselves. Let's look at an example. What happens if your ship stalls and catches fire in storm conditions? The oceans are far more vast than all the land-based countries put together. No navy can police every ship and rescue every passenger. It's aquarchy to the rescue. The seas are awash with volunteer rescuers. If there's a market for piracy, there's a market for protection. If there's a danger of capital loss, there's a danger for capital rescue. And the risks are formidable. The expense of putting out fires and rescuing crew and towing disabled ships to safety is more than many ship owners can pay. If a team of these badass volunteers rescues your ship and tows it to safety, how do you make it right for him and his team? The solutions are stateless. A rule emerged in antiquity that rescuers get rights of salvage. If you save a ship and the ship owner can't pay, you get to own a certain percentage of the ship. Almost no law applies to every land, but the law of salvage is almost universally recognized over 2/3 of the Earth's surface. And what if there's a conflict? What if the salvager says, I get 15% of your ship, and the ship owner says, no, you get 10% of my ship? Disagreements are brought to Lloyd's arbitrators, who require that all rescues be voluntary, without any pre-existing contract, and with no duty to act, and they don't allow any lawyers. On the ocean, aquarchy isn't permitted, it's required. And Lloyd's has no enforcement mechanism. They simply publish their decisions, and ocean industries across the world comply because they don't want to be known as the business people who defy Lloyd's decisions. It's complete anarchy on half the world's surface, which is the richest economy in the world. 90% of all trade passes across the ocean on ships. What we're going to consume next week is on the ocean right now. National economies would collapse without the ocean economy nourishing them. When we occupy the oceans and the technology is at hand, we'll discover planet Ocean, which is more than twice the size of planet Earth. And what's the point? Why do seasteaders care about this so much? Nation states are a primitive institution left over after old wars, and the millennials using Skype and Bitcoin and trustless contracts embedded in the blockchain and Google Translate are already moving on from this old, violent way of looking at the world, and we'd like to give them the other half of the world. 193 nation-states do not represent the range of ideas that 7 billion people have produced. In the US, we're operating according to government parameters written with quill pens when information traveled at the speed of a horse. Our founding fathers did not foresee instantaneous global telepathy, which we call Twitter. Ben Franklin innovated in both technology and governance. His technology innovation advanced. His governance innovation did not. How to allow innovations in governance to keep pace with innovations in technology? I'm from Silicon Valley, I know the answer. It's startups. Young people today need a Silicon Valley of the sea where 21st century ideas for governance can be tried and solutions discovered. The reason land governments are dysfunctional is because they're coercive monopolies. When it comes to state governments, we don't have any real choice to pay or not to pay. And our freedom to choose is what drives others' innovations. If you can float, your land is mobile. Imagine if your city was like a floating jigsaw puzzle. You can shift and assemble and reassemble at will. Societies could only form if people choose to attach to each other. If some politician asks for your vote, you can detach your houseboat, sail somewhere else, link up with your allies, and found your own floating nation. When you can vote with your house, governments will be like companies, and citizens will be like customers. Seasteaders think this will create a market of governments competing to attract residents. These are the fluid mechanics of voluntary societies that can't be properly characterized as nation states, which are founded on force. This isn't an argument for voluntary societies. It's the technology for voluntary societies. If you're a tyrant, you're going to have a very hard time getting a foothold in political power when your neighbors can simply take their property and float away. Seasteading emerges from a family legacy that started with Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman became one of the most famous economists of the 20th century because he taught about the power of choice. All of us voting on one solution creates a bottleneck of power that prevents progress and engages human corruption. All of us trying any solutions opens up the ecology of the market and engages human creativity. His son, David Friedman, taught about the power of mobility. He famously suggested that if houses were on wheels and borders were open, citizens who were dissatisfied with their government could freely drive their houses to a competing government. With that machinery of freedom, we'd have an economic solution to political problems. His son, Patri Friedman, asked, what if we lived on the ocean and could sail about and choose the neighbors we want? Ocean governments would dissolve if people removed their consent and expand if people chose them. On a fluid medium, citizens wouldn't struggle to survive governments' choices. Governments would struggle to survive citizens' choices. David Friedman described a machinery of freedmen. Milton Friedman advocated the freedom to choose. Patri Friedman conceived a machinery of freedom to choose. Will it work? Peter Thiel thinks it could. He co-founded PayPal, and he was the first investor in Facebook. And he and Patri co-founded the nonprofit Seasteading Institute, where I serve as Seavangelist. So many people want to see free-floating cities. Over 1,000 people have donated to the Institute. But who will build the roads? This is a Dutch design for a floating city. Seasteading isn't new. It's an old, venerable idea that is responsible for creating much of what is beautiful and sublime in civilization. Venice is an architectural masterpiece that the ancients called the floating city. Governments were so dysfunctional and violent that people seeking freedom found 118 submerged islets under the water where they built civilization on stilts. They discovered that canals were easier to travel than roads. Access to the sea and the easy flow of goods allowed Venice to attract commerce and immigrants. The most serene Republic of Venice, as it was then known, dominated the Mediterranean Sea for 1,000 years, producing explorers like Marco Polo, composers like Antonio Vivaldi, uncountable writers and painters and architects. I love Venice. I've spent months walking the same cobblestones that Vivaldi walked. If Venetians can build a wealthy republic more than 1,000 years ago with nothing but muscle power and firewood, we can build floating cities with diesel and hydraulics. Venice never lost its breakaway spirit of independence. Recently, 89% of Venetians voted to secede from Italy, and Italy said no. They have no choice. They're stuck to land. What if these individual units could break up, float away, reform as they please? You'd see a radical acceleration in progress in governments. We don't need to rebel against existing states. We need to show them how civilization is done, just as the people of Venice did. I've listened to arias sung in Venice. I've watched ballet on cruise ships. I researched these miracles on Wikipedia, which is an anarchotopia. We don't need to argue about voluntary societies anymore. We need to build them. We finally found the business model for seasteading. Lockheed Martin has spun off an aquaculture company, and they want to be their own country on the sea. They sell a unique fish that wins taste tests with sashimi chefs. This company claims that any investor who writes a check can board the world's first seastead 10 months later. They believe businesses could be attached fairly fast, starting with ecotourism, then a restaurant, etc. Contact me if you'd like to learn more. Check out our Floating City project. Right now, we are negotiating with coastal nations willing to grant us political independence in their territorial waters. If we can demonstrate that the business model for freedom flourishes in microcosm, we will attract more brains to solve the deeper engineering challenges of going to the high seas. We need your help. We need government allies who can secure legislation to guarantee us political autonomy. We need donors. Our nonprofit runs out of money in a year. Clerical assistant. I can't do everything and I suck at the small stuff. We need aquapreneurs with a business model to pay for seasteads, and we need book promotion. My book, co-authored with Patri Friedman, featuring my favorite aquapreneurs, will be published in 2016 by the most prestigious publisher in America, Simon & Schuster. I think this is the road to freedom, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thank you for listening.
Bom, Joe, muito obrigado pela apresentação. Tenho certeza que essa vai ser, se não uma das mais, ou a ideia mais fora da caixa que as pessoas escutaram aqui nesses 2 dias de evento do Fórum da Liberdade. Em virtude do tempo, temos pouco tempo para acabar o painel, eu queria fazer então uma pergunta. A gente sabe que as pessoas podem votar com os pés, deixando seus países, talvez, opressores e emigrando para outros países mais livres. Mas, às vezes, o custo de oportunidade de fazer isso é muito alto. De repente, em países como Cuba ou Venezuela, o custo de oportunidade é mais baixo. O que elas têm que renunciar, o que deixa para trás, não é tão ruim, vale a pena se lançar ao mar, deixar a ilha-prisão e emigrar para os Estados Unidos. Mas em países mais ricos e desenvolvidos, o custo de oportunidade pode ser muito alto. As coisas podem estar ruins, mas de repente nem tanto. Talvez não valha a pena deixar tudo para trás e ir para uma cidade flutuante. Como tornar essa ideia mais atrativa? Será que é a situação econômica que tem que piorar demais? Como fazer isso?
Well, it depends on what kind of business you run. If you are running, say, a biotech business, the opportunity cost of remaining in the U.S. can be quite high. It costs $2 billion and can take more than a decade to bring a drug to market. There are many people that are trying to advance anti-aging technologies who feel like they can't move forward in existing regulatory structures, and they are eager to conduct research on the high seas. So entrepreneurs, they want to do what they want to do, and they can't always, if 21st century technology doesn't always work well with 20th century regulations. So we want to create regulatory startups that will welcome these entrepreneurs working in 21st century technology. And these are the type of people that are very interested in seasteading. As our fish farmers, seaweed farmers, the regulations from the 20th century are holding them back.
Bom, mais uma vez, obrigado, Joe. E temos que encerrar o painel, então muito obrigado a todos. Uma boa tarde.